while you're doing that. Yep. Okay. Actually, I'm going to do this a little bit differently this time. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, John and Jake, and hopefully others to follow, thanks for joining us today. This is our fourth workshop in a series. This one's called Resolving Unanticipated Challenges. For those of you who haven't been around, we started these workshops back in September of last year, and our goal was really to make them interactive, be more participatory versus just a lot of content going one way. Jake, you were on an earlier one, so I think you can attest to the learning that happens when you're engaging with others on a problem, and hopefully that's been beneficial. Just as means of background, maybe for John and Jake and anybody else listening, our first workshop was focused on defining things like company mission and vision statements, as well as strategic plans and strategic initiatives, like annual strategic initiatives. Then we followed that up with a workshop focused on transitioning from strategy into execution mode. And then our third workshop back in, I guess, November, was around market research. So doing market research to underpin your strategy or to go out and validate things that are in your strategic plan. So today, the fourth workshop concentrates on activities that come into play when something in the strategic plan goes off course, and those unanticipated issues arise. It happens quite often, maybe not all the time, but certainly in my experience, something in the strategic plan and something you're working on that strategic might go awry. So what we'll work on today and talk about are things like root cause analysis and then developing those action plans to fix the issues. Let's see, Mike, if yeah, you got to the next slide here. So we'll start by introducing ourselves, and then those of you can introduce yourselves. So I'll just start since I'm talking. I'm Chad Eckes. My firm is C²E. It's an independent consulting firm where I provide go-to-market strategy and marketing advisory to B2B technology companies. Prior to going out on my own, I worked at Accenture and 3M, and 3M is actually where I worked with Mike. And we've worked together on and off over the years, both at 3M and Wolters Kluwer, and now on these series of workshops. So, Mike, why don't you go next?
Sure. Thanks, Chad. So I'm Mike Haldane. I represent a firm that is almost a year old called MarketWise Advising. And it's a firm that I started after having been doing commercial type activities for a variety of companies over 35 plus years. And so it was companies like Intel and 3M and Maytag and Wolters Kluwer and others. So I'm focused on market research, strategic planning, and commercial execution, all for the sake of enabling growth. That's where I've spent my career, and that's what I consult on. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Why don't we just do quick introducVR? Jake, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I'm an AI strategist that builds AR, VR, and AI pipelines for basically all verticals.
Great. Thanks for being here. John?
I'm John DeBush, a fractional product leader. I help tech and manufacturing businesses that want to grow into new categories.
Sweet. And Ling, I see you joined. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm basically working on data science AI strategy, consulting, and leadership coaching. I'm not sure this is the right fit for me.
All right. Great. Well, thanks all of you.
Feel free to stick around, Ling, if you're interested, and if not, if you need to drop off, that's fine too, whichever is preferential on your side.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, Mike, could you go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
Great.
Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah. So, just as a preface, hopefully all of you received in an email last week some pre-read materials and just a short 1.5-page case study about our fictitious startup company, Acme Med. This case study tells a little story about a product issue that comes up, and that'll be the center of our group exercises that we're going to do here in just a few minutes. But in terms of our agenda today, it includes some slides that Mike and I will talk through. But again, hopefully the bulk of the hour will be spent doing some of the collaborative group work. But by the end of the hour, our hope is that we all leave having learned some things, starting with the key tenet at the top there, which is even the best conceived strategies don't always go according to plan. And thus, leaders of companies like us, we need to have the tools available to help us get things back on track. So besides that, our other learning objectives as listed are how to assess when strategic plans do go off course and knowing when it's time to take action. Secondly, how to identify the root cause of issues, and then understanding what a good resolution plan looks like. So next slide, Mike. So to get things started, I'd like to share a story about a company and a product that probably all of you are familiar with, and that company is Slack. It's that collaboration software tool, messaging tool. I want to share this real life story from their history as it probably illustrates some of the concepts we're going to cover today. So a few years ago, I think it was maybe 2019, 2020, Slack set out to redesign its whole user interface, its whole UI, to make the platform more intuitive, and they felt more competitive because their goal was to simplify the navigation and make features more palatable for people that might be new to Slack. So they're targeting new users, people transitioning from other platforms. So they got an early version ready and they released it en masse to a small group of existing users. They kind of had a lot of features in there, put it out there for a small group, and almost immediately the feedback was bad, negative. Those users found the new UI confusing, that things were now in new places and things were taking longer. And so the Slack team was like, uh-oh, boy, what happened there? We really missed the mark. So they put a big pause on the redesign. Now at this point, the Slack team, they could have said, oh, rats, we just messed up. Let's just scrap the whole thing, go back to what we have, and let's not pursue any of that strategy. Well, they didn't do that. They looked back and they looked at the steps they took to get where they were, and they realized, yeah, we had missed an important perspective during those redesign sessions. What they missed was they hadn't really thought about what current users really cared about and how those current users would be impacted by these design changes. So once they figured that was their root cause of a lot of their issues, they set an action plan. They went to talk to and survey current users. They did interviews, they did polls. And then that really influenced the new design because they took out some of those initial plan changes that were causing confusion. They also developed different features that new users and existing users would find beneficial. And then they also decided to gradually release things one feature at a time to avoid overloading existing users. So they really realized that they couldn't just focus on the new users, but they needed to focus on both new and existing. So those actions got the redesign project generally back on track. And within 12 months, they had successfully finished rolling out the new UI, and they actually started scoring higher in user satisfaction scores, and that led to increases in paid users, which was what they were hoping for in the first place. So I mentioned this story because I think we can all probably relate to similar situations, whether you're in the software business or not, because we've had situations at our companies where we probably needed to take time to understand the root cause and then develop an action plan to address it. But there also might have been times where we didn't take the time to do that. And we just said, maybe the strategy isn't quite what we thought it would be, or gosh, it seems really hard. That's not the greatest solution, of course, but what we're going to cover today are ways to, move forward, take action, and try to resolve issues. Can you go to the next slide, Mike? I got one more before we get going here. So again, the steps that Slack took, they're probably not unique. Again, we've probably all been in a situation where, we saw an issue and we took action. That's pretty normal. But sometimes you don't have time. Sometimes you don't see the issues till they're too late. And that's also a big issue. I've been in that situation when the issues are caught a little too late. And then the strategic plan is even, in more trouble. There's high risk, or we're too late in the year to really course correct. But there is a way to stay ahead of things. And that way is to start with good measurement and tracking systems for your strategic initiatives. And this is a topic Mike and I did cover in an earlier workshop, and had a slide kind of like this, just showing like some initiatives you're going to measure on a standard P&L, like revenue and costs. Other strategic initiatives you might measure with things like customer satisfaction, or maybe in Slack's case, you're measuring the number of new features you build in a month. But either way, the idea is you if you're tracking your strategic initiative diligently, ideally with some sort of monthly measurements and check-in meetings, you should be able to spot when your plan is going off track. So in this slide, we're showing, again, a typical P&L. And let's say this is for like a new product that you're introducing, and the sort of new product launched in January. If you see 2 months of a missed goal, like if it's revenue, that's probably when you need to start digging in and thinking, something is probably wrong here, and we need to look at root cause and possibly, then enact an action plan. So we're just saying here that measurement is important, and that goes back to, again, earlier workshops we did. And then two months of missing a mark on a key measurement is probably where you want to jump in and take some action. So again, that's the focus of our workshop today: root cause, action plans, resolving unanticipated challenges. Any questions about things that I just covered? Okay, Mike, I'll hand it off to you because you're going to facilitate our first activity.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to jump into an exercise here in just a minute based on the case study that we sent out last week. But I wanted to talk real briefly about what we're talking about from a root cause analysis standpoint. So this is what I refer to as the 5 whys problem solving process, and it's something I learned many years ago and have used extensively, throughout those years since that time. And the idea here is to talk about what the problem is, or what the symptom is, as we know it at first blush, and then to talk about why that's happening, and to continue to ask why until we get to the point of the root cause, at which point we can start talking about a solution, an action plan that resolves the root cause, and not the symptom. So that's really what we're gonna be talking about here. So just by way of an example, so a symptom, kind of back to Chad's earlier comment about metrics, might be that we're not tracking with revenue. So let's just say that we had metrics on the previous slide and we missed 2 months in a row. Our symptom, or the problem as stated, is that we're not tracking with revenue. Well, in this process, what you would do is you would say, okay, well, why is that happening? And you might talk with the group and do some brainstorming, and they'll say things like, well, the customers that we're talking with don't like our offering. Okay, well, why is that? Well, they say that we're too expensive. Okay, why are they saying that? Well, they don't really understand us or what we do. Okay, well, why don't they? Well, because our messaging doesn't resonate. Okay, why doesn't our messaging resonate? We're all saying something different. So, to sort of summarize what the root cause is based on that quick and, simplified example, we would say that we're lacking meaningful, consistent messaging, which is leading to a misunderstanding of what we do, and therefore lackluster sales. So that root cause is what we would want to brainstorm an action plan around. And we'll talk about that in the form of an exercise as well. But before we jump to action planning, what I want to do is jump to the first exercise, which is to identify the root cause. So I am going to switch screens here for just a minute, or maybe a couple of minutes. Did everybody get the Miro link that I sent out on Friday? And if so, can you get into Miro without any trouble? And if not,
I can put it in the chat real quick.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could do that, Chad. And if for some reason, if you can't get in, just to preserve the time that we do have, we can do it from my screen, and I can just take your notes and we can go from there. But what I'd like to do is, in considering the case study, so this is back to the case study that we sent out on Friday that Chad referred to a few minutes ago. We'd like to define the problem. So, what is the symptom? And what I was thinking is that we could brainstorm this a little bit independently, and then we can compare notes. I put a few Post-its here, but in case you need another, you just simply click on sticky note off to the left on the bar here. And then that enables you to pick another sticky and then insert text, if you will. So does everybody have access now? Is everybody in? It looks like we've got, I think everybody I would expect to be in. So either create your own sticky or use one of the ones that are there, but start typing what you think the problem is, or the major symptom is, given the case study that that Chad is talking about. And I'm going to participate in this as well.
Mhm.
We've got time, so take a couple or a few minutes if you need to think about this. All right, so it looks like we've all kind of, let's see. Okay, the second post-it, I'm going to move off to the side for the moment. And the only reason I'm saying that is because before we jump to root cause, and we'll sort of save this one for later to see how close we actually got. But what I want to do first is just talk about how we would define the problem, or, you know, maybe a summary of the symptoms that we're seeing. So what we have is wearable devices are not reliably capturing accurate respiratory data. We have wearable hardware issues are causing quality issues, and we have wearables are not always picking up vital signs accurately. So, you know, I think these are pretty much saying the same things. What I'm going to do is just combine the three of them, and you know, we'll basically say, okay, this is going to define what our symptom is. So now I mentioned a few minutes ago that we call this 5 whys analysis, and it may be that we use 5 whys, or it could be that we use 2 whys, or maybe it's 6 or 7 whys. It doesn't matter. The point is that we continue to ask why until we get to what we think is the root cause. So with that in mind, what I'm going to ask the team is, based on the fact that we've got wearables that are not always picking up vital signs accurately, what do we think? Why do we think that's happening? And we'll document that. And again, we'll just keep asking why until we get to the point of root cause. So anybody can give me kind of their answer as to why we think this is happening. And because Chad and I have already talked about this, I'm going to call on either John or Jake. So,
Or Eric.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that we had. Oh, yeah, that's right. Eric, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I was late, guys.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
I'm not in the mural. It looks like I sent the request, but I haven't gotten accepted yet. But I can, you guys can just continue without.
Let me see if I can quick.
Yep. Thanks for trying.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm good with what I'm seeing too, though. So
Okay. Yeah, that works too. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this exercise. Okay, so devices struggle to consistently measure respiratory metrics under certain conditions. Okay, so and then devices weren't designed for the rigorous demands of medical diagnostics. Okay, so you know, it doesn't really matter in the brief exercise which one, you know, we think most accurately depicts what's going on. I'm just going to move this one over and assume that that's why we think that's happening, which I think seems completely logical. But now the question is, okay, why aren't the devices, or why weren't they designed for the rigorous demands of medical diagnostics? And so that's our next why. And so Eric, Jake, and John, feel free to add your ideas there. All right, so I'm just going to do what I did last time, and I'm going to pick the one that I think is representative. So, okay, so just by way of an example, so where we are so far is we said that our symptom was that the wearables are not always picking up vital signs accurately. The reason for that is that devices weren't designed for the rigorous demands of medical diagnostics. The reason for that was that the team was unaware that that would be an issue since they're mainly software engineers. So I'll ask a checking question at this point. Do we think that's the root cause, or is there a why behind that as well?
I think there could be a why behind, essentially requirements, right? Why were they missed? Why is the device not designed to pick up that particular? Oh, you don't want me to talk. You probably want me to write.
No,
You?
no,
No.
keep going. That's absolutely correct. So given that, let's go ahead and brainstorm another why then for why the team was unaware that this would even be an issue since they're mainly focused on software.
Yeah, not enough due diligence on requirements gathering up front.
Okay, so somebody document that. Now I'll ask the question again. Do we think that that's the root cause, or do we think there's a why underneath that as well?
Can I just ask a clarifying question to Eric?
Sure.
What and Eric, were you thinking like due diligence was around the needs of customers, the needs of the the healthcare community? When you say due diligence, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, right. They, if the device isn't designed to grab a particular piece of data, maybe they just missed the mark, or they're not a good customer. But that's not what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to capture it. And what I would say to answer my own question is that there's probably at least one more level of why. I think the reason this happened was because they're software people, they're not hardware people. They made some big assumptions about the hardware, and without the expertise in the company to say, hey, that's a bit of a foolish path, they didn't know any better. And so I think the why underneath this one is that there is a lack of hardware expertise on this team, and that may be the root cause that we need to solve for. So
I like
if
that.
if for the sake of time we just simply say, okay, that's the root cause that that we're going to land on, and that's where we'll start putting the action plans around. What I always like to do is to say, okay, let's do this backwards. So we're saying that our root cause is that there's a lack of hardware expertise on the team, which led to not enough due diligence with end customers on the upfront requirements, especially as it relates to hardware, which led to the team not being aware that this would even be an issue because they're software engineers, which led to devices that weren't designed, hardware devices that weren't designed for the rigorous demands of medical diagnostics, which led to wearables not always picking up vital signs accurately. That logic train seems to make sense. And, because we think, at least for the purpose of this exercise, that we've gotten a root cause here, this is where we would stop. And then we would hand off the exercise to, the team, whether it be that team or a different team that's going to go resolve that with an action plan. What I would say in the long form is that in the long form of this exercise, we would try to present evidence as we go. So we would say, okay, well, how do we know that the wearables aren't always picking up vital signs accurately? And we'd say, well, this, that, and the other happened, and we have documentation of that. So we would document that evidence as we go from step to step as well. But given the time that we have today, I'm going to end it there and go back to where I was with the deck and talk about a couple of more things before we jump into the next exercise. Okay, so in terms of how you get to an action plan, then, actually, Chad, I guess I'll hand this off to you at this point and let you run through this in the next exercise.
Sounds awesome. And just to kind of put a pin in that last exercise, again, you could certainly go further on whys, but I think there's always a natural stopping point. Like you might rack your brain like, oh, why didn't we have hardware engineers? Well, because we're a startup and we needed to, we only had so much money. Okay, well, you can't really solve for that, right? You're a startup and you don't have money, or the budget didn't allow for it. But in some cases, it might be, why didn't we have hardware engineers? Well, Mike and I discussed it and we thought we could get by without them. All right, well, why did we think that? Well, we just made some assumptions. Again, you kind of get to the end, you're like, okay, the real root cause is we didn't hire a hardware engineer. So, but I'm just saying that sometimes it helps to keep thinking through the whys, but then it brings you back to like an earlier why. So you naturally feel like, yeah, that's the root cause. So anyhow, like we said, with the root cause at Acme Med, it's now time to transition to solving the problem. And what we're showing here is just 5 components of tackling an issue and following it through to resolution. These are probably self-explanatory, but we'll cover these briefly just to make sure we're on the same page. The first one, which we even mentioned earlier, was solutions brainstorming. So now that you've agreed upon the root cause, it's time to have, a team, ideally, multiple people, come up with some possible action plans. It's probably good to get input from multiple stakeholders, so not just work in a box and be the only person coming up with an action plan. So again, it can be a meeting specifically focused on, solutions and developing an action plan. It could be using Slack or something like that to just collect ideas from people. But the idea is just getting a lot of input, so it's not just one person coming up with it. And once you have that, you have ideas on the table, you can start creating that formal action plan. And that should take the form of a project plan with activities, owners, due dates, milestones, etc. It's also best to assign somebody who's responsible for that project, who can track progress and keep the team on task, and also report progress to others. Again, maybe these components are commonplace for all of you, but again, simple things like documenting the plan, tracking its progress, those times they get skipped because people think it's not as important, or we just got to go fast. And maybe sometimes there just aren't resources to do it because everybody's really busy. But yeah, just try not to fall into those traps and take a little time to develop a plan. And to that end, I think the next slide gives just a kind of a straw man of that. And Mike was referring a little bit to this earlier. This is a one-page template that Mike has developed, and it sort of starts with the issue itself. What's the problem? And then it documents the whys. And again, you have underneath the whys are those evidence components that Mike was speaking about. So that's included in this template. But then on the right half of it, it's really the action plan. So you have kind of action, owner, due date, etc. And you list out those actions. So this could be a really high level, one pager about the action plan. But again, you want to be able to put some dates around things and say, we want to get this done by then. That leads to then the next step, which then leads to the next step. So sort of classic project management. And I like to use other tools, like if people have used Asana or other project management template tools, those are great for, again, getting everybody in there, getting people on the same page, automating messages to check in, and then reporting, having a nice reporting feature, something like that. So we won't go into Asana today, of course, but those are some good tools out there to track projects. Any questions about this before we get into the exercise? Okay. Then I think, Mike, we're going to go over to the Miro board again, right?
We are. Yep.
Okay. I'll get in
So
there
let's
too.
do that.
So maybe I think I'll drag the root cause over to this part of the screen here. So hopefully you guys can see I'm doing that.
Yep.
It's not an arrow. So to start with our action plan, we should really be thinking about what actions are needed to rectify the root cause. And this is independent of thinking about maybe by when and by whom, but you can certainly think about things in parallel. But what we've set up here, again, are some post-it notes to answer the question first. What actions are needed to rectify the root cause? And then we'll sort of go by action, the what, when, and by whom. So let's maybe just start with people typing in some actions that might be a good idea for rectifying the root cause that there's a lack of hardware expertise on the team, and put yourself in the shoes of the two founders in the case study. I got to remember their names. I think it was Charles and Michelle.
Does someone want to accept my request to join?
Where is that?
It says your request is sent to the board and on its way. One of the board editors approves your request.
I am not seeing that. I don't know where that is.
Hmm.
I didn't
We'll
have to
find it.
approve
We'll
anybody
find
else.
it.
I just had them on
We'll
the,
find it.
I don't want to take the time. I'll maybe click the link again.
let me,
Maybe I clicked something wrong too.
yeah, I'm not seeing where that is.
All right. So we're getting some ideas here, which is great. Give everybody another few seconds to type some stuff.
Mine was going to be train somebody.
Okay.
I'll document
add
that
them.
real quick.
Great.
I got it.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely fair to say that it's not just these two founders that are in the organization at this point, but it is not a large team. All right. Well, let's read through some of these here. So we got some good ideas. Starting a process to find a hardware device expert, hire a hardware technical lead with medical device expertise, discuss critical capabilities and ways to vet, evaluate current wearable devices to document specific failure modes and conditions. Excellent. We need to understand what type of expertise we need. Ask beta users what level of accuracy they expect. Train someone within the organization on hardware matters. Contrast development activities with appropriate talent. Yeah, all of these make great sense and they are logical to me. I think I can see how they might be sequenced into an action plan as well, because to some degree it's like, no duh, if we don't have hardware expertise on the team, we need it. So yeah, that's definitely the end point of getting somebody with that. Now, the idea of training somebody is one path. The idea of hiring somebody is another path. So maybe the first action item is hire, you need to get to that decision point probably in the action plan. Do we hire or do we train? But before that, I think what I'm sensing from these sticky notes is that you need to understand what type of expertise you really need. And that might come from, say, asking users what that level of accuracy is that's needed. So I think we've got the makings here of a good action plan, and I won't, we could get into more details and say, oh, this should come, we forgot this part of the action plan, but let's just have fun with what we have here and say like, well, what would that first action likely be of all the things we have? Again, I feel like it's maybe this one, understanding what type of expertise we need, but does anybody else want to challenge that?
Chad's question is an important one because in a real life example, this would all be very vetted, right? So you would assemble the team that needs to make these decisions and say, okay, let's go through this brainstorming exercise to resolve this root cause that we've identified. What are all the possibilities for doing that? And then you would vet that and say, okay, well, this one's redundant with what, Sally said. And so we're going to combine those two, and that one's a little bit off base, or no, this one is perfect, and so let's go do these three things, and then you would develop your action plans around that. But for the purpose of the exercise, we're just going to pick probably one or two, Chad, right? And then just sort of build out the when and the buy home.
Mm-hmm.
I have a follow-up thought, because I think it is a very, very valid question, because you could go hire somebody that's the wrong person if you don't know what it is that you're trying to get out of the hardware itself, right? And so I really kind of like the blue one there a little bit. You're kind of asking the same question with the one you already pulled down, Chad. But it's like, let's get to the bottom of what we really are lacking in the hardware, so that we can go find the respective person. Or maybe it's just it's a less of a need. We don't need to hire a full-time person. Maybe it's a contractor we just pull in to get ourselves educated on what it is, and then we're off to the races again because we got the right software crew to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think even just talking through this with the five of us, you can see how this process could really be beneficial, right? Like asking people to brainstorm, put their ideas out there, and then starting to move them around and having a very, open conversation about, where do we start with this, right? Because some people's heads might be one place, some people's heads might be another, but this is a good venue for getting on the same page and like everybody starting to feel like, okay, yeah, this is the right path. It's not maybe as cut and dry as, open a rec and get somebody in here and, pay them this much. So this is great. So again, just for the interest of practice and, possibly other questions that come up from us, let's say that this first action is, a blend or kind of the same, need to understand what type of expertise we need. And really, even before that, or along with that, we're going to ask our beta users what level of accuracy they expect. So what you would do next is you would, again, if you're saying we want to do this quickly, or we kind of want to figure out, well, how quickly can we do this with our existing resources, but we know we want to do this first, you'd kind of say, when do we want to get this done by? Well, we could say within 2 weeks or something. Just it depends on how much time everybody has and who's going to do it. And in this case, all we know is that there's two founders. There's somebody who's more on the business side and someone more on the medical side. So I'd probably put it in, the chief medical officer. I think that was Charles.
Yeah, and that's not to say that they wouldn't pull in other team members. It's just that they're the ones that would own it. Right.
Right.
Yep.
So then if we again, just in the sake of practicing, so let's say we get through that piece, then what would be next? Is it evaluate current devices to document failure modes? Is it start a process to find a hardware device expert? or maybe we need a step in here that's about, decide whether we need a hardware expert or we need to hire someone or if we can train someone. Because that kind of seems logical to me, right? Just at a high level.
Yeah.
And then we could say again, like we take 1 week to vet that, and that's CMO and CEO, right? And then lastly, let's say they, if hiring, develop a job requisition,
Yeah.
right? And maybe that's your CEO. And sorry, I got that wrong. That's the when. But again, I think we get the idea here. How this would work, whether you're using Miro board or whiteboarding or just, on a virtual meeting, just taking notes, and then putting something into like this template that Mike has provided in the slides or some other document. But I think it is important to, be able to retrace your steps in your decision making. So document things. And again, the importance of putting it into an actual plan and having somebody track it so that you're on track and you're moving towards resolving the issue. Any other feedback or comments, whether it's Mike or our participants? Has anybody used like a virtual whiteboarding solution like this or physical whiteboarding to essentially brainstorm an action plan for some kind of issue?
I've done it with just sticky notes, not necessarily I'll call it a very specific case like this, more of a broader, hey, here's what we want to build.
Yeah.
But very effective nonetheless.
Yeah, I think a lot of us started out doing this with, a whiteboard or stickies, on a wall in an office environment. And then I started using this right before the pandemic hit. And then it became a lifesaver for being able to do virtual exercises like this in a corporate environment. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, let's go back to the slides then. And how do we get there? So we did the second exercise. We've got just a couple of slides left. So now that we are through the action plan, I just wanted to highlight a key point, which is sometimes, the action plan is going to require that you go back and you do further research. So in this example, we said, well, we need to understand what we need and what the requirements are, what the expectations are and all of that. So that means that we've got some further research that needs to be done. In the exercise that I showed, there may have been additional research around messaging. But whatever the case, the point here is that it may be that you need to explore competitors further or price sensitivity, segmentation, unmet needs, whatever it may be. There's a variety of things that might be a part of the action plan that are market research focused. And what I want to say is that just because you're down the path with a strategic plan and you're thinking, well, we should have done the research before we developed the plan, there are always going to be situations where new things come up and they still require market research. So when I talk about, kind of the big 3 steps that my firm is focused on, those being research, strategic planning, and execution, I always say that sometimes you go from, the first category to the second and then the third, but then you go back up to the second or back up to the first because there are things you missed. And kind of back to Chad's earlier point about, really you get to the point where you encounter something that you didn't expect. And you can say, look, I've got 2 options. I can try to resolve this quickly so that we can keep this plan moving, or you can say, nope, well, that didn't work out the way we thought. Let's give up and go back to our tactical execution. And that, unfortunately, is what a lot of companies do because it's, to Chad's point, it's hard to resolve things that you didn't expect, but nothing strategic is going to happen if you give up that quickly. So, it's important that you continue on and that you do whatever is needed to resolve with the action plan, whatever that root cause that you determined was a root cause actually was. And, we gave a simplistic example with the exercises that we did, but it was for the purpose of just making sure that everybody could relate to it. Because, I think we all encounter things like that every single day. So in terms of summarizing then what we've learned, so as we've talked about, no plan is perfect. They never are, they never will be. So being willing to quickly resolve the unanticipated challenges is key. And what I always tell my clients is, you should expect that we're going to discover things that we hadn't thought about once we get into executing this plan. And that's okay. That's to be expected. Expect the unexpected. The challenge and what I try to set everybody up for is to be willing to quickly jump in and resolve whatever those challenges are. As Chad mentioned, we want to take action once a monthly miss occurs 2 months in a row, because it could just be an anomaly if it happens just once. But if it happens twice, you know that, hey, there's probably a trend here that we need to jump on sooner than later. The thing that I would say about action planning and I guess just execution in general is this is something that you want to be watching all the time. So it may be that you meet once a month to review the key metrics, but if you're the owner of a certain area, a certain strategic initiative, you want to be watching this daily, and at least weekly. And then you're going to be reporting out to the rest of the team on a monthly basis. So by the time you get to the point of a miss, you're probably going to have a pretty good indication of what's happening, what's not happening. And you may say, look, I'm going to watch this for another month, but if this continues, we're going to jump into a root cause analysis and make sure that we put an action plan in place. We talked about this. Maybe we didn't make as big a point about it as we should have, but the idea of solving for root cause as opposed to the symptoms. If we solve for symptoms, we solve a symptom, but we don't really make the problem go away. We just, maybe found a workaround for a particular symptom. Solving for root cause, and I know this is obvious, but solving for root cause is the idea here, and the purpose behind that is to say, look, this set of challenges that we've experienced, all the whys that we went through in the exercise, are all going to be resolved because we're solving the root and not, the branches of the tree or the leaves or what have you. And then, as Chad talked about, the remedy is this action plan that includes the what, the when, and the who. For the what, we were pretty high level. In a real life example, you would have, pretty specific details in terms of what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and who's going to be responsible for it. So you're going to have an owner. You're probably also going to have multiple team members who will be a part of it as well. So with that, we can end the workshop. But before we do that, if there are any other questions or comments that people would like to make, we've got 4 minutes before our time is up.
Mike, a question for you. What are some signals that you look for to tell you that you really have root cause, not that you're giving up too soon, or that you've dug too deep and gotten into something philosophical and
Yeah,
not
yeah, and
solvable?
that can happen pretty easily, and that's where the team comes in. This has to make logical sense, and the logic as you go back up the chain needs to track. What I would say is you keep asking why until you just can't ask why anymore. But then you have to sort of pair that with an action plan. As Chad said, if our why goes all the way down to we don't have enough funding, and that's why we didn't have a hardware engineer, that may not be something you can solve for. But if you know that you don't have a hardware engineer and that's what caused the rest of the symptoms that you're experiencing, you can solve for that, right? In a variety of ways. We can say, look, we need to hire somebody, we need to bring in a consultant, we need somebody fractional, whatever it may be. Or maybe it's just we just partner with a better hardware company that's more adept at operating within the climate that we're operating within, and maybe that's the answer to the problem. But I think you ask until you can't ask anymore, and then you say, okay, can we put an action plan around this? And if the answer is yes, then that's where you stop. And if the answer is no, we need to go up a couple of levels, then go up a couple of levels.
Thanks.
That makes sense?
Mhm.
Good question. All right, any other questions or comments or anything else you guys would like to chat about?
I'm just having kind of a follow-up thought. I don't know if it'll lead to much, to be honest with you, but the exercise is so valid, and it really is knowing when you've got something versus not. And you've already described kind of what you do and how you do it. In my situation, I am a startup, and it is lack of resources, and so you have to be even more strategic
Yep.
to where you spend. Like, is this a real issue or not? And so, just having, I'll call it the exercise, or taking yourself through this exercise, to reveal it, I think is certainly what I'm taking away.
Eric, so give us an example of one of the challenges as a startup that you face that you're thinking about as you're giving this example.
Um, we've got so much time, right? What we have done, I'll just say predominantly, has been a delivery company, and we've been very successful at it. We went and built our own product, and we thought, oh, this will just sell itself, and it's not.
Mhm.
And so then the questions are, why is it not? And it's it's a lot of things, right? Am I addressing a specific issue? And that's our other challenge, is that we can kind of do anything with this, right?
Mhm.
And so, ours is, why is it not selling? Because if I was struggling to deliver, then there'd be a whole nother set of issues.
Yep.
So that's my reaction to your
And
question.
what's your product? The product that you built that you're referring to?
We have two different products. One actually is in the wearable market, so I kind of enjoyed this case study,
Okay.
where it's a workflow solution, where a set of smart glasses is worn, and we're able to guide a user through a sequence of screens. And the competitor is a voice solution that also walks a user through it, but they don't have that visual component, and so there's a lot of waste that goes on, because we're able to bring the visual component back in and reintroduce the scanning component. The accuracy goes
Mhm.
way up.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Jake, seems like you're thinking about something you want to share.
No, this is great. This exercise is great. It makes a lot of sense. It's a nice reminder. And then also the pattern for looking for if this is occurring, basically, in, if it's just kind of the pattern that it's recurring, I think
Yep.
is also really valid to look for.
Yep.
Because we actually are a software team, and we do struggle with hardware a lot, and we actually do some form of wearables, um, uh, and yeah, it's interesting. It's like a lot of times we're trying to understand the customer, but also um, constantly fighting against hardware requirements.
Yep.
Um, because the hardware only can do so much, and we are constantly finding ways to do things that seem impossible on very simple hardware.
Mhm.
And so so having both those expertise, and what's kind of interesting is we've just done a lot of strategic partnerships with hardware
Yep.
companies, because a lot, the way we're structured, it's kind of an umbrella of startups.
Yep.
And so there's not a lot of funding in some of the startups, and some of the startups are well funded, but each one is sort of offering their own service and product, and all those depend on hardware, and a lot of times there's not really a budget for hardware, and that's kind of what I was saying, sort of vetting uh, the hardware capabilities, because I mean that's a big bucket that you're trying to figure out. Okay, well, I might hire this hardware expert that knows medical devices, but they may not exactly know what I need to know to improve.
Right. Yep. Great example.
And has it worked for you?
Yes, definitely. I think the biggest advantage to having strategic partners is you get information way ahead before the public gets it. I think that's a major, major thing. And they're willing to troubleshoot their device. And so you can have conversations with them, and they're biased, but
Mhm.
there's still value there. So as
Yeah.
a startup, working directly with the hardware manufacturers, I think is a huge advantage, because then you're aware of kind of what their roadmap is releasing, what issues they're going to run into, what sort of performance um, optimizations, that are coming sort of down the line, and you can kind of plan for that. I think that's almost a critical need.
And mutually beneficial, right?
Oh, always. Well, that's the
Mhm.
thing is they're, I'm in VR and AR, and VR and AR is, it's enterprise focused, but it really kind of hasn't hit that sort of tipping point and mass adoption. And a lot of our clients, they adopt the technology, it solves their need, and then that's kind of it. So the repeat business is where we see issues, because it solves their need, right? I mean, we offer a fantastic product that basically solves their need. And so they kind of don't need to return unless they have sort of another initiative. Um, and it takes so long for these deployments to, um, well, anyway, it takes a while. And so having hardware expertise and kind of understanding kind of where things are going, you can also plan with your software team to know, okay, well, this is going to be optimized, so we might be able to do this and this. But yeah, I'm getting into the weeds.
Makes
Great
sense.
example.
Okay, I like the weeds
Yeah, the weeds are
Fun.
where the good stuff is for sure.
where the magic happens.
Mhm.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting hardware. And then I think another strategic partnership is AI, having one of those 5 major tech AI providers, being able to have some sort of advisement with them if that's the kind of products that you're offering, because that's the other side. When you're doing software, it's almost, now we're doing machine learning AI as well, and so just kind of
Yeah.
understanding kind of where those models are going to be, and just being aware of that again is also critical. But again, I was getting into the weeds.
I'm not tracking. You're saying having a strategic partner with AI. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, like hardware, AI is kind of its own world, and it moves, I mean, exponentially fast on top of exponentially fast. And so, um, if you're using models in your devices, which we are, we need to know how much those models are going to cost, what kind of model drift we're looking at. Um, it's all about reliable products. And if we know that they're going to constantly, so for instance, very quickly, we have a deployment that was costing like $100 a test. Now the test ran for a couple of days, but it was $100 a test. That's not really viable for what the client needed. And so we had to get that down to fractions of cents to get that to be a viable test. And so we reached out to our strategic partners and we're like, what can we do? And they're like, oh, there's all these things you can do. And now we have that deployment running in fractions of cents. I don't know if we would have gotten there if we hadn't had that advisement. And as a startup, having strategic partnerships, millions of dollars of research is done, and then you have access to that. And so I see value in that.
Jake, who are some of the companies that you see as the big players in that AI space for advisement, like you're talking
I
about?
think, interestingly, Meta is a major player. A lot of people may not think that Meta is a major player, but Meta is a major player. Obviously, OpenAI and Claude, Anthropic, those are the ones. But interestingly, Google has really done some pretty impressive stuff recently, and of course, AWS. So those are the main ones. But then there's a whole bunch of sort of quiet ones that are slowly gaining ground. But I would say those are the major ones. For
What
sure.
about Microsoft? Are they in that bunch as well, from your perspective?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
OpenAI and Microsoft, I consider
Yeah.
it kind of the same thing
Yeah.
at this point. In all fairness, yes, Microsoft offers Copilot and agents and AI Studio, etc. But at the end of the day, it's OpenAI.
Yeah.
They're not really offering something separate from OpenAI.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the two kind of to watch right now is OpenAI and Anthropic. They're kind of trading back and forth. But again, Meta is producing, Meta is really interesting, specifically for enterprise, because it's all about fine tuning their models. They have open source models, in quotes, because they're not releasing weights, but fairly open source models that you can fine tune. You can fine tune with your data, your proprietary data. And so instead of being trained on all the internet with all the internet garbage, it's trained on your enterprise data. And that's an effective, that's, you know, been shown a very effective solution. And so Meta is quietly becoming sort of the go-to for fine tuning. There are other models you can use, but that's the one everyone seems to be using.
I haven't done a lot of research I have with all the others that you mentioned, but with Anthropic, I have not. Who are they aligned with? Are they aligned with Meta or with Microsoft or anyone like that?
Amazon.
Amazon. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a great question because each one is aligned.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
What do you mean by that? Each one's aligned.
So I would say NVIDIA is the major hardware provider for all of them.
Okay.
That's definitely in alignment. OpenAI is directly aligned with Microsoft. Anthropic is directly aligned with Amazon. The Meta is pretty big, which is interesting, but I would say they're directly aligned with kind of a lot of the companies, which is really interesting. And also, it's important to note that Apple's aligned with Microsoft, aligned with OpenAI, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very, very strong force. And I'd also say that AWS is a very strong force. So, you know, you kind of have three buckets. You know, you have the Meta, you have the Anthropic, and then you have the OpenAI. But again, what's so interesting about this world is Google was kind of not even being talked about. And now what they've just released over the break is amazing. Text to speech and their vision models, and then their huge context. So kind of, I wouldn't say overnight, but a surprise, what Google has introduced is pretty amazing. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to see something from X, or you're not going to see something from Grok with a Q, or you're not going to see, there's other quieter companies that haven't really been talked about yet, but I think you're going to see those pretty soon too.
Yeah. And Google, you know, the next frontier, I would suspect, is quantum computing, and Google has made some pretty crazy progress there as well. So that's going to be an interesting next. That may be a number of years off. Right now, we're in the middle of, or maybe even at the beginning of AI. But quantum is probably the next big thing, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And yeah, Google's Willow chip is really impressive. But you're totally right. I think it's quantum has so much. I mean, it sort of works off chaos. It has so much hallucinations right now that it can't really be used reliably. And I think that's where we get to, is that reliable, consistent results.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And your point to again, going back to your original point, is to find one of these that is going to bring you the value. And you're saying plug in your, right, plug in and get that value out of whatever the platform is. Is that right? Am I picking up what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Sort of identify kind of what your critical needs are, and then kind of figure out what a value add strategic relationship, because you have to add something to them. You basically have to give them something as well. So for instance, what we do is we give, I mean, we work with all of them, and we do a lot of user testing. And since it's an unusual use case, VR, AR, and spatial is kind of sort of unknown for a lot of these strategic partnerships. There's value in sharing our knowledge and our expertise. And a lot of times we will work with solutions and solve things in surprising ways, and then offer those solutions to our strategic partnerships.
That makes sense.
Definitely symbiotic, for sure.
Yep. And
I see.
Jake, I mean, to the point about Amazon and Microsoft, I mean, in the hosted environment, you're paying not just for server access and bandwidth and all of that, but you're paying for the tools that are being developed as well that make the whole development process go much faster, right? It's kind of a build
Absolutely.
once, used by many type model, and you're of course paying for that, but that's at least part of what you're talking about here, not just the consulting side.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. I mean, most of our clients want something that's going to be around, you know,
Yep.
and right now, kind of how wild everything is, it's hard to plan.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the other logic behind that too.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Well, that was a quite fascinating after discussion. So thanks for taking
Yeah, a
the
little
time,
commercial
guys.
there.
Good stuff.
Yeah, that was really great. Okay, so thanks for taking the time today and a little bit of extra. We'll be talking, Chad and I, about what our next workshop will be here shortly. So we'll leave you guys in the loop on that as well. I'm going to we'll send out a link to the video in case you want to reference it later. And also the tool that we talked about as far as finding root cause and then defining the action plan. So we'll make that available in the next couple of days.
Excellent. Chad, good to see you. Mike, good to meet you.
Yeah, you too,
All right,
Eric.
likewise.
Jake, John.
Everybody.
See you all.
Thanks so
All right,
much.
guys. Have a good rest of the
Very
week.
helpful.
All right.
You
Take
too.
care.
Bye.
Bye now.